Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve Bisson. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight-to-the-point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to episode 19 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm Steve. If you haven't listened to episode 18, it's all about music and how it affects our mental health, and I hope you get a chance to listen to that. But today I will be meeting with Sarah Terpstra. Sarah is a money coach, and she helps people eliminate financial stress and build lifelong financial security in 90 days. So they can spend guilt-free without a restrictive budget. She'll coach anyone to set up priorities as well as goals. She is a mother of 3 girls under 6, and she loves to travel with her husband. She really tries to make saving money fun and has a Facebook group that I will absolutely link in the show notes. And I also know that she has her own story that she's going to want to share with us as to what made her get to this journey in her life. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I know that you are too, so let's just jump to it. Welcome, everyone, to episode 19. Episode 19 is going to be a very interesting conversation with Sarah Terpstra. We're going to talk a little bit about how a money coach can help us even with our own issues with mental health and all the stress that can come from money, because that's what we're really facing on a regular basis. So you heard me in the intro. I gave you the Sarah's bio, but ultimately I want to get to know Sarah. So Sarah, welcome to our episode 19 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Steve.
It's interesting because I love meeting people through Instagram and not knowing anything about them. And what I mean by that is it's very helpful to get to know someone this way because it's on the same level. So how about you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you live, where you've been, and all that fun stuff.
For sure. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get to know someone when you have a limited amount of characters on Instagram. So I'm Sarah. I'm 26 years old. I've been married for 7 years. My husband, he's an accountant. I have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old who's sitting behind me. If you hear any chirping, that's probably her.
We're good with that. We're good with that.
Yeah, my husband and I love to travel, and we've been all over the place. Our 5-year anniversary, we spent in Ireland. So we've crossed the pond once together, and that's something that's a passion of ours. We live in rural Minnesota, so up in the sticks, we call it. We like to go hiking and spend a lot of times by a lake and on the water, and that's something that we very much enjoy.
So water's your thing. Well, I'm a Cancer, so water is definitely my thing. In your travels, have you found yourself to get closer to your husband? Do you enjoy the travels with your husband? Because sometimes that can be a headache for some people.
We do. No, my husband and I love to spend time together. He works less than a mile from our house. So oftentimes during the week, he'll come home on his lunch break. And so we can have lunch together. And we went on our first trip together. We went on a road trip to California from Minnesota after we'd been dating for about 6 months. And before we went on that, it was I was told by my family, like, this will probably make or break you. Like, if you can handle a road trip cross country with a man, you can probably handle anything that comes your way together.
So after 5 years of marriage, I guess it worked out.
Yes, 7 actually.
7. Wow. 7 years together. Okay. Well, I'm happy that it worked out for you. And rural Minnesota, how is that living there? Because I lived in rural Vermont. I'm sure it's a very different animal to live in rural Minnesota, though.
Yeah, well, in the wintertime, we're pretty much locked in our houses for about 2 weeks. Last year, we had a winter vortex come down from the Arctic in Canada. So it was 30 to 40 below zero for about 2 weeks. So you don't want to leave your house for more than 2 minutes at a time or you'll get frostbite.
See, and I'm from Montreal, and most people think that that's what happens in Montreal most of the time. Like, no, that's Minnesota. That's Saskatchewan. Blame Saskatchewan. And we don't do anything like that in Montreal. We're very tempered. We have those freezing days here and there, but we're much more temperate. So
Yes.
I always like when they talk about the Arctic vortex. They recently changed it. It used to be the Canadian vortex, and I'm like, why blame Canada for everything?
Yes.
So we go on a journey in our lives, all of us, and so you are now married, you have 3 kids, you're happy, you're living in rural, and now you're a money coach. How do we get from being in rural Minnesota to become a money coach?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, isn't it? So I grew up, I didn't have a whole lot of financial knowledge. And my husband and I started dating right after I graduated high school, and he was going to school to become an accountant. So he was raised with sound financial principles. And my parents did put me through, I don't know if you've heard of Dave Ramsey, but he's a big financial guru in the States. And so I went through his Financial Peace University as a senior in high school. And the thing that really stuck out to me was living a debt-free life and not being indebted to anyone. So when I went off to college, I was determined that I was going to at least spend my first year and not be in any debt by the end of my first year of college. So then my husband and I started dating at that time. And so we dated for a year and then we got married. And after we were married, my history growing up with money started to come out in my behaviors. I was continuing to spend money even when we weren't working because we were in college. And after my husband got a job, he said, since you do the majority of the spending, my husband's a saver and I was the spender. And he said, since you do the majority of the spending, I think it would be good for you just to look at our expenses and the money comes in and maybe try to keep track of that. So just, an encouraging nudge in the direction, not outright saying, hey, stop spending my money, but general nudge in that direction. So I did. And once I started building that awareness and writing things down, like, hey, we spent this much money on groceries, we spent this much money on going out to eat, maybe we have some room to cut corners in that regard. And that's kind of sparked something in me. I started to grow this obsession. I was in my sophomore year of college at that point. So from that point forward, I took every accounting course that my school offered. I took every personal finance course. I was taking business. So I ended up with a 4-year degree from the University of Minnesota Morris, which is it's a very academic university that's, kind of on a cow farm. And so you'll be out at one of the sports arenas and all you can smell is cow. And it's amazing how academic that place was. I very much enjoyed it. And from there, I started to dabble in entrepreneurialism after we had my oldest, my first daughter, because I wanted more out of life. I wanted more than just living to pay bills, living to pay childcare expenses, living to pay daycare. And so I really became a money coach because I wanted to be financially free. I wanted to give my kids a life that I didn't have. And after I achieved some financial freedom, I wanted to share that with people because it's like, there's this whole other world out there that people don't even know of because they're so used to having a car payment and a house payment. And they're so used to having a phone payment every month. And once I had been on the other side of that veil and that veil was lifted, it was just like, there is so much more to life than paying your bills every month.
Well, I think that's a hard lesson for a whole lot of people, especially when you look at, I would say, the last 20 years where consumerism has become God. So how do we convince someone that you only lift your depression for a short amount of time if you go buy that shirt?
Yes. I see retail therapy is a huge thing. It was something that I once subscribed to, but now it's more than just spending money, because what I found is that when you earn a paycheck, you're trading your time for money, right? Your time and effort. And time is something that you have a limited amount of. You only have so much time in your life. And if you're trading that for a paycheck and then you go and take your paycheck and you just spend it on whatever sounds good in the moment, then you're basically trading your time and effort for nothing, for something that doesn't last, for something that is not a good investment. And when you can see that, you can be like, okay, I don't want to go spend $200 on makeup this month because, first of all, I already have makeup. And I would rather put that money towards investing for retirement or towards our next trip to Mexico.
Well, I already hear like people like listening to this and going, what does she know? I need $200 of makeup. What is she talking about? So how does someone really change that thought process? Because I'll never be a fashion model by any stretch of the imagination because t-shirts last 10 years with me.
Mhm.
But I know that that's just how I kind of grew up and it's normal. How do we tell someone that getting the latest model, or the latest lipstick, the latest whatever, is not necessarily what is in the best interest of you, despite that you feel good for a short amount of time?
Yeah. So I think just looking back at the history of humanity, like what do you need to survive? You need a roof over your head. You need some food on your table. You need some clothes on your back. You don't need to have the latest Gucci model of pants. You don't need to have the most recent model of Audi that has been produced. You don't need like those are luxuries. Those are wants. And I differentiate between a need and anything that's not a need. I see it as a luxury, not just a want. It's not just, whatever. That is a luxury. If you don't need it, it's a luxury. And that's something that's kind of hard to come to grips with. And it starts with just raising awareness around what are you spending on? What are you buying? And then once you have that awareness, you can look at, okay, is this a need? Do I need this to survive until next month? Or is this a luxury? Is this something that I could put off a couple months? Is it something that I could wait until Black Friday to purchase? Is it something that I could wait until next year to purchase? That sort of thing.
Delayed gratification, is that what you're saying?
Yes, in so many words.
But I like delayed, I think that that's a hard lesson for just about anything, not just money, but in general. I think people struggle with delayed gratification. We've come to a world where if I did want to get the latest Gucci pants, and no, you'll never catch me in those. But if I ever wanted them, all I have to do is go to Gucci.com or whatever their website is. I'm not trying to plug anything here, and go get them. So how do we resist that impulse, that control? Because I think that thinking long term is one thing. But if I'm feeling like, no, I got the money, I got this bonus, and I'm going to spend the money now versus waiting for a trip or whatever, how do we convince someone to wait?
Right. So in my coaching program, I like to start off with taking a 10,000-foot view of your life and starting to visualize, what do you want your life to look like? And what do you want to have? What do you want to do? What does the 10,000, if you were to be up in an airplane 10,000 feet above the world, and you look down and you see your life from that perspective, what do you want it to look like? What's important to you? And thinking about your priorities, right? So if you're, for example, I'm a mom and moms love their coffee. Now, I don't necessarily like coffee that much, but I know that a lot of moms do. So some of them
Interview really over if you don't like coffee. Sorry, just kidding.
For sure. So if going to Starbucks and getting a cup of coffee, if that's important to you, you can find a way to prioritize that and to make room for that. And that's why a lot of money coaches, they use budgets. I don't use a budget. I use what I call a spending plan. And this is something that in your head, when we think about a budget, we feel restricted immediately. We think, I can't go out with my friends. I can't go buy makeup. I can't go out to Starbucks. Those are immediately the feelings that are brought up because that's what a budget is. But when I use a spending plan, it subconsciously tells you that you still get to spend money. You are just giving your money some direction and some intentionality behind it. And so when you can do that, yeah, for sure, still go to Starbucks. Give yourself $100 a month. You can spend at Starbucks guilt-free and don't feel bad about it. It's just because that's something that happens, right? If you go to Starbucks and all of the financial gurus out there, they say, cut out that daily coffee, make your coffee at home. Well, sometimes a cup of coffee at home just is not as satisfying as a cup of coffee from Starbucks or Caribou. If you're from the Midwest, we love our Caribou here.
I wish we had caribou around here, that and Tim Hortons, but please go on.
It is so good. And I don't even like coffee that much.
But yes, no, I get it. It's great. It's a good idea to think about a spending plan. I like that. And, your idea of a 10,000 feet view of your life. I like all that. Just want to remind everyone we're on Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm Steve. I'm sitting here with Sarah. We're talking about money. And I think that the next good question that I want to really bring up is I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how financial stress can affect people's mental health. Because I think that that's one of the things that we are very much underestimating sometimes that some of our actions is due to financial stress and affects our, creates anxiety, creates depression, sometimes trauma for that matter. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think that both financial stress affects your mental health, and mental health also affects the stress that you have about your finances. What I've seen with my clients is that financial stress primarily affects your relationships. If you're stressed about money, you're going to be a lot more reactive. You're going to probably yell at your kids more frequently, probably yell at your husband, feel a little bit more strain in those relationships. And it might even color the way that you treat your extended family and your extended friends. Like you might start to resent your friend who always suggests you go out for beers on Friday night after work because, that costs a lot of money. And when you're stressed about money, it can color your relationships. There can be some resentment that grows there. And I kind of mentioned this, but it causes you, when you're stressed about your money, it causes you to be more reactive instead of being proactive. So when things happen to you, you're kind of operating from an empty cup, both literal and figurative. And that affects you more because when you feel like you don't have anything left to give or nothing left to spend, then everything feels so much bigger. Events are more impactful and it hurts more versus when you tell yourself, I don't need that. That's not something that's important to me. That's not something I prioritize. I have enough money to have my needs met month to month. And you feel complete in that, then that can help you just to mitigate some of that stress that comes with your finances. It's just telling yourself, I have enough money to get my needs met. I might have to forego some luxuries here and there, but that's okay because those aren't important to me right now.
And I think that that's where, you talked about a great word. I like resentment because it does really create resentment in other people. And the other thing that I find is that people look at it as a comparison thing, keeping up with the Joneses or the Smiths or whatever they call it this week. At the end of the day, do you think that the comparison also is part of the financial stressors that some people feel? Joe goes to Starbucks all the time. So obviously I got to go to Starbucks all the time. Or they're going to eat at Sonic and obviously we need to go to Sonic. Do you think that the comparison also plays a huge factor with that resentment and other stuff that impacts your mental health and your finances?
I absolutely do. I absolutely think that it's a cultural thing to want to go out and spend your money and tailgate football parties. And there's a lot of money that goes into those things. I mean, if you're planning to host, especially host a football game, tailgate party, you're going to probably spend 50 to 100 bucks each time. And if you do that weekly, that's 400 bucks a month.
And just for the record, it costs about $70 to park at Gillette for the New England Patriots game. If you go to a UMass game,
goodness.
It's like free because it's UMass. But yeah, so even on the East Coast, if you go tailgate in any of the big stadiums, you're looking at just a park. It's going to cost you money.
Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, if we think about comparison, I think that is an external thing. It's an external factor. Your friends are going out, so you have to go out. And if you start to look inside and say, do my friends love me? My friends want me to succeed in life. Maybe if I were to suggest we come over and just share a cup of coffee together or have one round of drinks at my house instead of going out and spending $100 at the bar, that can be something too. So it's taking an external factor like culture and comparison and things that you want and things that other people have that you feel like you need to have. And then turning that introspectively, looking inside of yourself and saying, do I really need this? Is this something that's important to me? Do I really want to continue doing this? And if you do, then you need to find space in your spending plan and cut $400 out somewhere else so that you can continue hosting tailgate parties or bringing a massive platter of food to someone else's tailgate party.
Yeah, and it's funny. I did a episode on people pleasing, and it's sometimes that's what happens, right? We want to please other people, so we get that extra food. We go the extra mile, but we're not really pleasing ourselves. We're not pleasing our financial needs and all that. Which kind of
Mhm.
brings me to a little bit about the mental health again, and talking about, do you feel that when we are able to set those boundaries, we might lose friends, and that would affect our mental health too? Or do you think about it differently? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I think it can. I think it varies on circumstance to circumstance. Ideally, if your friends love you and respect you and want to see you succeed, then they will be behind you and they will encourage you and they will say, okay, yeah, so you don't want to spend this much money, let's do this instead. Versus if you have more of a superficial friendship or you guys just aren't that close and they really value going out and getting drunk over spending time together, then there could be some friendships lost there, and that could play into mental health. However, I will say that people are, on average, the average of the 5 people they spend the most time with. So if you spend a lot of time with people who just spend their money and don't even give it a second thought and just do things flippantly, then you're probably more likely to do the same thing. And it's going to be a lot harder for you to save money than if you were to find someone who saves money and puts money towards retirement and saves for taking trips debt free and is paying off their debt. Then you're going to be a lot more likely to be like those people who are saving money and doing things debt free and able to plan for an early retirement.
I really likened it to fear of not, of others, like basically saying, well, I'm going to set some boundaries or going to do things like that. And it certainly is difficult when you're leading it towards fear versus just acceptance. And is there a way for people to feel empowered enough to communicate that to others? Because I think it's hard to talk about finances. And we'll definitely get to the other part that I want to really relate to this, which is our own mental health. I think that we struggle with, I'm feeling tense, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, or stuff like that. So, do you think that we can overcome that fear by setting those boundaries with people? Or do you feel that there's ways that are more effective of doing that or things like that?
I think there's a lot of fear around setting boundaries, and there's a big stigma around money. You don't want to tell people that how much money you make. You don't want to tell people how much money you need to spend every month for your expenses. Like you don't want to tell them that, yeah, I have this really great job for 3M and I make 6 figures a year, but we also have 6 figures of debt that we're paying off, and we pay almost all of my salary just towards paying off our debt. And it's something that people don't want to admit. There's some guilt. I see a lot of shame come up, like, how could I have let this happen? How could I have let myself get so far in debt? There is some resentment towards, this circumstance happened to me and I had to take out debt because that was the only way to survive. And that, that happened to me. That wasn't something that I went out and chose to do. And I think what can help here with setting boundaries and with overcoming this is just realizing that, for starters, your money is your own. And you get to decide what you do with your money. And you also get to decide how you react to situations that happen. For example, my husband and I, this year, the month of March, we had to fix our van. Because we have 3 kids, we have a van. I always said I would never be the van mom. I always wanted a truck, but here we are with 3 in car seats.
Wait till they all play soccer anyway.
Yeah, our town isn't big enough to have a soccer team. That's how rural we are. And we had to buy a new oven because our oven started to spontaneously combust and it would randomly heat to 500 degrees at any given moment. So we're like, yep, I already experienced one house fire in my life, so I'm not going to go through that again. And we had to fix our furnace. Like it was like everything that could have happened in a year happened to us in the span of 6 days. And it was really stressful. And even when we were prepared for it, it affects your mental health and it affects how you react to people and how you treat other people in your relationships. Now, luckily, being a financial coach and helping people, I always want to practice what I preach. So we had an emergency fund set up. And so we could use that to mitigate the costs that were incurred from all of these expenses that we had to deal with. And And so that is one tip of advice too, is to always be setting money aside for an emergency fund, because that will save you from a lot of mental stress if you do have a big circumstance happen.
It's interesting because when you were talking about that, there's so many things that came to mind. One of the things is there's a book called Profit First for people who own their own business by Mike, and I can't pronounce his last name. And that's what he talks about. It's like, have an emergency fund, have a profit fund, have a vacation fund, create these checking accounts so that you can have that money available to you. And it really teaches that discipline. And I think that that's what you're talking about, a lot of discipline that people have to develop.
Yeah, I haven't read his book. I want to. It's on my list. I have about 20 books on my list to read right now. But what I've heard good things about it. And that was a principle that I had been living by, is profit first. Don't pay for something until you have the money to pay for it, without even reading it. But the only criticism I've heard of that book is the having all of those bank accounts for each of those funds is very confusing for people. And when people get confused, they get overwhelmed. When you get overwhelmed, a lot of the times we shut down. And when we shut down, it's like, okay, what can I do right now to feel good, So they take out their credit card and they go to Gucci and they buy the latest handbag, or they go buy the latest palette of makeup from whoever the most recent Kylie or whomever the most recent makeup artist is.
Well, and I think that what I've done with that information is absolutely, I would agree with you that it gets overwhelming for a whole lot of people. So I didn't start with, like, I think he recommends 6 checking accounts or something like high like that. And I started off with, one for my taxes and one for my profits, and then went from there. And obviously it's grown, but I think that there's ways to manage it. And I'm not plugging Mike at all. And I agree with you that when I first tell people like what he says in the book, they get very overwhelmed. And you're right. It creates that need of instant gratification. But, I think that plays a huge factor. The other factor that you talked about earlier was shame. I think that shame is something that we all struggle with, and not only financially, but mental health wise. I encourage people to talk about their mental health on this show, obviously, and hopefully, and I know that we briefly exchange on the subject, but do you think that having some of your own struggles with mental health can cause you to really get focus on doing the right thing eventually?
Yeah, I do. It comes back to what do you want, and thinking about what's important to you, and who do you want to please? Do you want to please the people outside looking in, or do you want to please yourself and have a really great marriage and have a really great relationship with your kids and a really great friendship with the people that are close to you who respect your boundaries?
Yeah, and again, just a reminder, finding your way through therapy. I'm Steve, sitting here with Sarah, talking about money, and she's a great money coach. We're having a great conversation about that. Let me ask you, do you feel that maybe your own personal experience with your own struggles with stuff with mental health has caused you to be even more responsible financially, or do you feel comfortable sharing any of that information?
Yeah, I do. So I have, as I mentioned before, I have 3 kids. After each of my children, I developed postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, and as I'm only 18 months postpartum from my most recent child, I still have the lingering effects of that, and really going through the process of realizing that it was a problem. I didn't go in and get diagnosed until after I had my second daughter, and she never slept. She would wake up 4 to 6 times a night until she was 13 months old. And finally, towards the end of those 13 months, I just wasn't acting like myself. And I was having a lot of dark thoughts. And I'm like, whoa, this is not me. There is something wrong here. I have never experienced this on this level before. I maybe had experienced some depression in the past. When I was a senior in high school, I lost my best friend tragically. And I think that's kind of where a lot of it stems from. So definitely, I think, and especially living in Minnesota, we have seasonal depression here. It's bad. Like we had mentioned in the past, our winters can be sub-zero temperatures for weeks on end. We get the Arctic vortex come in. Last year, we couldn't go outside our house for almost 2 weeks because it was 30 to 40 degrees below zero. And that's really hard when you can't go out. And already the amount of sunshine we get here is so limited in the wintertime. Then if you're forced to be indoors with your family for 2 weeks on end, it can be very stressful. So the amount of seasonal depression around here is very high. And in my personal experience, having postpartum depression, anxiety, and then just being diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, it has led to, there has been a lot of stress, and there is a lot of stress around financial health. And what I found was plugging in, not putting a lot of pressure on myself to do everything and get everything done right now and have all of my ducks in a row immediately, because that's not how it happens. You're used to instant gratification, but when you're in the process of straightening all of that out, it's not going to happen instantaneously. And coming to terms with the fact that that's okay is a huge first step. Raising awareness and just realizing that, okay, it's going to take me this many months to get all of my ducks in a row, and that's okay. And if I have a bad month or an unexpected bill pops up, that's okay. And just giving yourself some grace there, because I've been doing a lot of personal development work this year as I was working through my postpartum depression. I spent a lot of time in therapy. I spent a lot of time just doing my own emotional journaling and working through things internally.
Gotta tell you that we're probably just like separated by geography, because we have some. I didn't have postpartum depression, but I certainly struggle with seasonal affective disorder. Being in Montreal, being in Boston, we don't have a whole lot of sun in the wintertime, so we end up having. I don't always take it every winter, but there's winters where I call my doctor and say, "Look, it's just not working for me." And
Mhm.
she sends me medication, and I have no, we used to be a shame in my family. We grew up with a lot of shame in regards to mental health,
Mhm.
and nothing against them. It's just how it was. But I think they're learning to be okay getting the help for seasonal affective disorder, learning to go get help. I lost my best friend when I was 12. So I certainly relate to that part of the story. There's a lot of stuff. Like I said, we're just geographically separated, because I can relate
Mhm.
so much to a lot of the stuff that you're talking about. When we have all that, and I don't know how your family was, how do we go out and say, look, I need that boost so that I can manage the rest of my life? And I think that that's hard to do. How do we encourage people to do so?
Yeah. So my family is very similar. I grew up with older parents in rural Minnesota. There wasn't a whole lot of like, when I was growing up, it was, oh, that mental health stuff. That's just city people problems. That's not something that could affect us here. And then as I was in high school, my mom came down with depression because she was involved in a bullying situation from a coworker that was so bad that, she just couldn't take it anymore and had to go in and seek help. And then when I was postpartum, it was something that it just kind of pops up. And I never expected that I was healthy, I was eating good, I work out every day, I try to go get sunshine outside. And it's like, it gets to the point where you can't out habit a chemical brain imbalance. And there's nothing wrong with that. And just coming to grips with that, like, because when I was growing up, it was, oh, just go get more sunshine, just go work out. You'll get all of those happy hormones. Working out doesn't always make me happy.
Yeah, I get it.
And so I was doing all the things, and I just got to the point where it's like, what am I doing wrong? I am doing all of the things. I just don't know what to do. And there was nothing wrong with going in and talking to your doctor and working with them, and going to therapy was a big help for me. And just admitting to yourself that, you know what, I can't out habit a chemical brain imbalance any longer. And I deserve to have that level headedness, that, because for me it felt like it was highs and lows, it was ups and downs, it was, I felt really good or I felt really shitty. And just coming to a central balance and feeling more like myself again. Because I think that's something that especially moms deal with when you have kids. It's like your whole identity shifts. And now there's this tiny little person who's the size of, barely your two hands, who depends on you to live. That's a lot of responsibility. That's a lot of stress.
Stress doesn't even cover it, if you ask me. The one thing that I also talk about, you talk about the change in identity. One of the things that I learned a long time ago from a friend of mine is that when she had her first baby, I asked her, "How are you doing?" And she's like, "You're the first person to ask me." And the baby was about 6 weeks old, roughly. And she's like, you're the first person to ask me. Everyone's asking about the baby and how the baby's doing, or how is my partner handling it, or what have you. And I think that when we think about mental health, we forget how stressful it is for a mom to handle all of that. And it's not suck it up buttercup. It's not that easy. If it was that easy, then everyone would be doing it. And when you have a chemical imbalance, it plays a huge factor in that. So, do you think that one of the things of sucking up buttercup is also playing a factor in how people also manage their own mental health as well as their finances, frankly?
Yeah, especially, I think especially for moms, because it's always just been this expectation that, oh, billions of women before me have done it. Billions of women before me, have given birth unmedicated, and I had to have a medicated birth. I just feel so guilty about that. And that was me. That was my story a little bit. And then there's just always been, oh, well, you're a mom, like just deal with it. Just, you have your kids, you decided to have kids. And it's like, I'm not the only person in the relationship here.
Right.
So I like what you said, because I always make a point whenever I'm chatting with a new mom, I always ask them how they're doing, how their recovery is, because it is something that gets left behind. And when you're on, especially a mental health journey, so often we say, oh, how are you doing? And the answer is, oh, I'm fine. And then how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. I hate that. It drives me crazy. I want to know what is on your mind. What's in your soul right now? Like, what is laying heavy on your heart? I am here for you. I am supporting you. I want to help you if you're, going through something that's challenging, and offer my support in any way that I can. And that's, in my experience, is not a super common perspective, because I just think that people don't want to deal with other people's problems. And I think that there's something to be said there, that that's part of why our culture is so hard, why it's so hard for us who have mental health problems, because we're not validated in them, and we don't have that support that we need to overcome them in a tribe. They always talk about the mom tribe or the girl squad. And it's like, most people don't have that, because we're so isolated in our own familial groups, our own nuclear units, that leaving my house after 5:30 p.m. Are you crazy? Like, I'm already in my jammy pants.
Right.
I can't go out that late.
Right. I always liken to when people ask, how are you? A guy will say good when they're not doing good, and a woman will say fine when she's not fine. And
Mhm.
I know it's a gender stereotype. It's not absolutely true. But one of the things that I've learned to do, even in my practice, Quebec, if you ask someone from where I'm from, if you ask someone how they're doing, you want an honest answer. And if they don't give you a right answer, you challenge them. You're like, no, no, tell me the truth. Like, yes, I'm an American citizen now, so I can say this very without shame. That's what I kind of dislike about sometimes in American culture is like people ask, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. How are you? Fine, fine, fine. And we need to learn how to be much more honest about that stuff. And I even model
Mhm.
it in my sessions. If my clients ask me how I'm doing, I never say good or fine unless I am good or fine. I actually
Mhm.
answer the questions. My uncle passed away a few weeks ago, one of my favorite uncles. And someone asked me, how are you doing? So frankly, really struggling because and people are like,
Mhm.
well, you say that to your clients? Like, it's not disclosure as much as modeling. And we got to
Mhm.
model. You talk about your mom tribe, you talk about any tribe for that matter. We need to learn how to model not to answer good unless we are good.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate what you said. I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah. And what we have here is we're Minnesota nice. We don't want to put our problems on other people's plates. You want to be nice,
Right.
right? And that's kind of the cultural expectation. But I challenge that, and I might not be quite as verbose as yourself in verbally challenging it, but it's like, no, I really want to know. I really want to know, like, how are you really doing right now? And half the time people just give me this deer in the headlights look, like, I don't know how to answer it aside from just saying that I'm fine or good.
And I think that that's why, like, by having people like you doing it on a regular basis, we will get to that point. I don't know if it's going to be necessarily in our lifetime, but I think that even teaching our kids to be truthful about their emotions is really important. And the other thing I want to mention is when you have a baby, never mind that you're now outnumbered 3-2 in your household. Most people like don't understand that what you're doing for 8 to 12 hours, and that's if the baby sleeps okay, all you're doing is surviving. You're not,
Mhm.
you're not looking at anything else but to survive those moments. And I certainly relate to the daughter not sleeping. My first daughter did not sleep a full night until 13 months in. So I certainly relate to that too. And I think that that's where we need to be more mindful of, because again, how are you going to manage financial stress or your finances, period, if you're so stressed and not having time to think about yourself or about your finances, never mind just surviving and going on 2 hours sleep.
Yeah, it's definitely very hard. And like you said, how are you going to come up with an organization structure or a financial plan when you're surviving for so long of your so much of your day? And how can you do it in a way that adds to your cup, like fills up your cup instead of continually emptying it out? Like, my money is just one more thing, one more iron in the fire, one more thing I have to deal with. So in my money coaching, I use the acronym SIMPLE for my framework. So it stands for a simplified, intentional money plan to live empowered. And really, it's just giving you, it's not easy, but it's a simple way to organize your money, to clarify what you want, and to modify the behaviors that you have in a way that empowers you to live a life that you love, to be able to go to Starbucks, to be able to take a trip to Mexico, to be able to plan for your early retirement or whatever is important to you, while still being able to enjoy the life that you have. And when you realize that you don't have to give up things that you love to get to where you ultimately want to be in life, I think that's a big revelation for people. And it helps to mitigate some of that stress that comes, because they think when they're coming to work with me, like, they're not going to be able to spend any money, they're not going to be able to do anything fun. And when I tell them that, no, we're going to, what are your priorities, what do you want, what's important to you, then it's just like all of that stress just goes away, because they're like, I can still live a life that I can enjoy, I can make this happen long term, I can make this sustainable. And there's a lot of stress that comes off right away when they realize that.
Just a reminder, listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm Steve Bisson, sitting here with Sarah Terpstra. We're talking about money, we're talking about mental health. And I think you make a good point. And what I really liked in what you just said, in my opinion, is that, again, that whole instant gratification, all or nothing thinking that people have about money. Oh, I'm going to see a financial coach, or I'm going to see a financial advisor. They're going to tell me to stop spending. I've met a lot of financial advisors in my life, and none of them have ever said to me, "No, you got to stop spending and eat ramen every night." They usually, I don't like the budget thing. I like the spending plan a whole lot better. I'll be perfectly honest, and definitely, hopefully, people will be contacting you in regards to a lot of that stuff. But as we kind of like wrap up here a little bit, as we're getting close to the end, I'd love to hear more about how people can maybe reach you and talk to you and what you can do for them and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. So currently I offer a 12-week money transformation program, and it's designed to help you figure out what your simple life is and what your simple plan is. And it offers clarity, it offers organization, and it gives you the behavior modification to be able to reach your goals and make it almost as easy as breathing. Because when you make something a habit, then it's just like you just do it automatically, and it's just automatic. So saving money or putting money into retirement is just as easy as breathing at that point. So I have a Facebook group called Simply Freedom with Money Coach Sarah. And that is where I spend the majority of my time during the week. I teach live trainings there. I answer questions. I do teach 2 live trainings a week. We do a motivational inspiration training, and then we do an actual money management, debt management, savings, spending, whatever the theme of the month is. Our theme for October is getting ready for the holidays. I love planning for the holidays, and we love to give gifts to people who are important to us. And I think that especially when you're on a money journey, some stress comes out when you think about the holidays, because you have to buy gifts for all of these people in your life, and you want to make them important, and you want to make it good. And there's sometimes this pressure, like you got to spend a certain amount of money to do that. In some families, sometimes there's, oh, I gotta give a better gift than my brother. I got to give a better gift than my sister. And there are ways to do that. If you can prepare early enough, you can make that happen without it being a big financial stressor. if you build that into your plan, which is something that I do. Additionally, I have a website, moneycoachsarah.com, where you can interact with me there. Last month, I launched my first book. So my whole life, I've wanted to be a writer. And so last month, I created a ebook workbook bundle, and that's called Roadmap to 1K. So that's really designed for people who have been stuck in the paycheck to paycheck living. They want to save money, but every month something happens where they just have to dig into the savings that they had set aside, and it's starting to build real wealth. So that's Roadmap to 1K. And that is something that I'm very proud of, for being able to create that, because it was kind of a life goal that I wanted to achieve. So that was exciting.
Well, congratulations on writing the book. And I certainly will be linking all that in the interview notes with the book and the Facebook group and your website. Lastly, I guess what I would like to ask you is, I think that we can all make moves in mental health to just improve ourselves for one day. I think that we can do the same thing in pretty much every aspect of your life. If you had one, without selling everything that you've already said, I don't want you to give it all away, but what would be the one thing people can do financially starting today to help themselves out?
Well, one thing I like to again, make things as easy as breathing. So if you set up an automatic savings, even if it's $25 a month, $25 a week, just to get you in the habit of saving money and making that something that you can really start to build and start to grow. And once you get aware of how much money you have left over at the end of each month, you can increase that to $250 a month or $250 a week even. And so I would say that, just taking a small amount until you get comfortable with it, until it starts to feel like you're not restricting yourself, and setting up some automatic savings in that regard.
I will vouch for Sarah. I did not know that's the advice you're going to give, but I've done that for about 6 years now. I've been to Disney twice by saving that amount of money just for my trips. So that absolutely works. It's automatically out of my checking account. I don't even see it. And it's increased every year. So it is the greatest way to start. So I really like that advice. So hopefully people listening to this episode will be will follow that advice and look for stuff online that they can do, and certainly contact you through Facebook, Instagram, or your website and read your book, which, had I known, I would have read that book. But unfortunately, right now I just learned about it. So, hey, let's cut the veil, and I'm not going to pretend here. So, Sarah, it's been wonderful to have you on. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat today.
And I hope eventually maybe we'll get back together, talk, because I think this is an important thing. Mental health and money are really related, in my opinion. So looking forward to talking to you again.
I agree.
So thank you, and have a great day.
You too.
Well, that's the end of episode 19. I want to thank Sarah Terpstra. This was an amazing interview. I really got to know her, really loved her journey. And I ultimately really am thankful for her sharing some of the tricks right here on our podcast. And I hope that you guys go to her Facebook group. She answers there, I think, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I really encourage you to go there, as well as her program. And I will link that in the show notes. Really, truly enjoyed talking about how mental health and money can be related. And I also really liked her story, and it really was touching to me. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Episode 20, we will be talking about the difference between trauma and PTSD. So please join us for that episode. I also want to thank everyone who has liked, followed, or subscribed through all your favorite podcast providers. Please continue to do so. Please share it with others if you really, truly enjoy it. And hey, do a review. That's always very good. And you can always join me on my social media accounts, where I promote a lot of different things, including this podcast. And I'm at Steve Bisson LMHC on also social media. So I will see you for episode 20.